Is,
All right. Two,
is,
three,
Jean,
Bobby,
is-
all right.
is Jean Savary on?
Yes, I am.
Yes, she is.
Okay.
Good to
Does
go.
that make it? Does that make everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Then let's begin. Welcome to the Coastside Fire Protection District Board of Directors meeting, a regular board meeting on June 24th, 2020. Roll call, please, Jean. Whoops. Jean Hadley, roll call.
Burke,
Yes.
oh.
We can't hear you, Jane.
Lost JB, where'd he go?
Here.
Okay, Secretary McShane,
Present.
Director McKimmey,
Present.
Director Stockman,
Present.
Deputy Chief Cox,
Present.
All right. Thank you.
Attorney
We'll pass-
Savary,
Present.
Oh, well.
and myself. Anybody else on?
Chief Larkin.
Oh, Chief Larkin's there too?
Chief Larkin is on as well.
All
Who
right.
else? Who else?
Chief
That's
Larkin.
all.
Okay, that's good. I got everybody then. Okay,
right.
go.
Do I have any public comment?
No pledge of allegiance?
No, we've passed on the pledge of allegiance.
Okay, thank you.
No public comment. Moving on, do I have a motion on the consent calendar?
So moved.
Do I have a
I'll second it.
Any discussion?
Director McKimmey, this is Jean. I would suggest that you recuse on these items, please.
I was going to ask if y'all jumped too soon. So I'm going to recuse myself from any consent calendar items.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. All in favor?
Aye.
Roll call.
Aye.
Opposed?
Roll call.
Oh, that's right. We have to have a roll call on these. I'm sorry. Roll call, please, Jean.
President Burke,
Yes.
Vice President Cockrell,
Yes.
Secretary McShane,
Yes.
Director Stockman,
Yes.
and McKimmey is 401 call.
Thank you. Moving on, item 6, continuing business. Item A, adjustment of board compensation. Chief Cox.
Thanks. I'm going to defer to Jean Savary on this, please.
Yes, good evening. This is a second reading of an ordinance amendment which would increase the board's compensation from $125 a meeting to $167.50 for a maximum of 2 meetings per month. This item was introduced on May 27th and would normally be a consent calendar item, but we placed it on for continuing business because we were asked to provide you with some additional background information, which you'll see on page 3 of your staff report. We were asked to look into the level of compensation paid to board members in other fire districts in the Bay Area. We've listed all of that out on page 3 of the staff report for you. And while you see that some other districts pay less per meeting, they compensate for greater numbers of meetings per month. And if you adopt this evening, then your compensation will increase to $167.50 for a maximum of 2 meetings each month. The ordinance would be effective 60 days after adoption, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Before any questions, let me open a public hearing to see if there's any public comments on this item. Hearing none, I close the public meeting. Questions, discussion. Board members, any question or discussion? If none, then I would like a motion to approve ordinance number 2020-03, increasing the board compensation for the Coastside members of the Coastside Fire Protection District Board of Directors.
I move that we pass resolution number 2015-01 is what it says on mine.
I can't hear you, JB.
I understand it. Is my microphone on? Am I close enough now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I feel like a cell phone commercial. Anyway, I so move.
I'll second the motion.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion or comments? Roll call, please, Jane.
President Burke,
Yes.
Vice President Cockrell,
Yes.
Secretary McShane,
yes,
Good off. Okay.
and McKimmy,
Yes.
Director Stockman.
Yes.
Passes 5-0 by roll call.
Thank you. Continuing business, item B, adopt resolution number 2020-44 determining tax liability for Community Facilities District number 34, Chief Cox.
Yeah, this is a ordinance that would impose a special tax upon CFD number 34 for the 4 following APN numbers that are listed on the board report.
Do I have a motion to adopt resolution number 2020-44?
So moved.
second,
Discussion or questions? Roll call, please, Jane.
President Burke,
Yes.
Vice President Cockrell,
Yes.
Secretary McShane,
yes,
Director McKimmy,
Yes.
and Director Stockman.
Yes.
Passes 5-0 by roll call.
Moving on to continuing business, item C, adjustment to an update of fees. Chief Cox.
This will be, again, handled by legal with Jean.
Yes, good evening again. This is the introduction of an ordinance which would amend the district's current fee schedule, which has not been adjusted since 2006. This was talked with you about at the last meeting, and we asked for direction on whether or not to prepare an ordinance. You asked us to do so, and so the ordinance is before you this evening for introduction. In the ordinance itself, which we've attached, all adjusted fees are shown in bold and underline. Those fees were derived by the chief conducting an analysis of each one of those services and matching that with the number of hours it would take to perform that service, and then matching it with the actual hourly pay rate for the personnel that would be providing that service. That's the way that you set fees so that they are correctly calculated. If you have any questions on the actual fees, I'll have to defer that to Chief Cox, but if you are satisfied with the proposed amendments, then we would request that you introduce the ordinance this evening, and we will set it for a second reading and adoption at your next meeting. Thank you.
Before we proceed, I'll open a public meeting for anybody who wishes to comment on this ordinance. Hearing none, I'll close the public meeting. Chief Cox, did you have anything else to add to this?
No, I think Jean did a good job on that. This is really, the intent of this is really just to recoup the costs that we outlay for all of the fire prevention services that are the responsibility of the person either requesting the inspection or administering the plans. This is really just a truing up of those costs to the district.
Which I repeat again, have not been done since 2006, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Board members, any comments or discussion? Then do I have a motion to introduce the introduction, the first reading of the ordinance, and setting the time for the second reading for adoption on July 22nd, 2020?
So moved.
second,
Any further discussion? Roll call, please, Jane.
President Burke,
Yes.
Vice President Cockrell,
Yes.
Secretary McShane,
yes,
Director McKimmy,
Yes.
and Director Stockman.
Yes.
Passes 5-0 by roll call.
Moving on to new business, item A, review and approve a resolution to County of San Mateo declaring 2 seats open for election of the District Board of Directors for the 2020-2024 term. Chief Cox.
Again, Jean will be handling this item.
Good evening. Adoption of this ordinance is a requirement of state law, and the resolution. The resolution must demonstrate that you have 2 seats open for election in November, that candidates are responsible for their cost of their own candidate statements. Those statements are limited to 200 words, and you are agreeing to reimburse the county for all costs incurred in conducting the election. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Reimburse the county for the conducting of the election. Is it reimburses the county, the board, or the candidates?
The board, that's a function that every public agency takes on when they contract with the county to conduct the election.
Okay, that's just for a second. Sorry. Thank you so much.
Gene Savory, in the notice, it says that the expenditure for this would be $65,000, correct?
Yes, that's the estimate of the cost of the election.
Which is,
A
everybody
lot.
pays it. Is there any further questions? Then I'd like to have a motion to approve resolution number 2020-47.
So moved.
Second,
Further discussion?
What are the two seats? Who are the two seats that are open?
I believe it is
Jake?
Board Member Cockrell and Board Member McKinney.
Okay. Yeah.
Any other questions? Roll call, please. Gene?
President Burke,
Yes.
Vice President Cockrell,
Yes.
Secretary McShane,
yes.
Director McKimmy,
Yes.
and Director Stockman.
Yes.
Passes 5-0 by roll call.
New business, item B, review and approve the Coastside Fire Protection District preliminary budget for the fiscal year 2020-21. Chief Cox.
Thank you, President Burke. This is a required document that is really looking at the next fiscal year for the Coastside Fire Protection District. And it really comprises two things: is the revenues and the expenses of the district. We put this report in a format that hopefully is somewhat easy to follow along with, but high level kind of summary of this. We anticipate going into the next fiscal year from this current fiscal year, so July 1, with a fund balance in our operating fund of about $5 million, which will be the starting point for our funding for next year. In addition to that, we have a majority of our revenue generated from property tax for the district. You'll notice on the last few pages of the actual preliminary budget, there's a breakdown of exactly what our revenues are and what percentage of our budget that is actually made up of. And of that, we are going to be conservative going into this next fiscal year based on the COVID pandemic, at looking at total revenues from all of those different accounts at just under $13 million, about 12.9. Hopefully it'll be higher, but a conservative estimate is keeping it fairly flat with what this year's actual realized revenues were. In addition, we've been able to construct Station 41 with a excess amount of operating funds that have come in over the last year. And that leaves us actually with additional money and reserves in our LAIF account, our internal services funds, that puts us in a very a good position moving into the next fiscal year, having some extra reserves to potentially put towards other projects in the future. For next year, we're looking at about a $12.4 million operating expense if you put all the operating expenses together. And additionally about 2.4 in capital outlay. And that's really the finishing of Station 41, as well as one fire apparatus and one other vehicle. Additionally, we think if we realize all of the revenue and we have no unforeseen expenses beyond what we've budgeted for, we may be in a position about this time next year to contribute an additional potentially $1 million to our reserve accounts. And that puts us at a total expenditure of about $16 million for the year, with a $2 million fund balance being our floor going into the 21-22 budget. Just a few things to note for next year. There are a couple things that we anticipate that we'll be spending on. One is a PPE, a second set of turnouts for our firefighters to come into compliance with the county standard, which is required for cancer risk reduction. That is going to be a new expense for us. Additionally, some improvements to some of our existing facilities, just some maintenance of items that need to be addressed, as well as a few remaining items at Station 41 that we will have to complete the purchase on, essentially the FF&E, the furnitures, fixtures, and equipment that have been ordered in this fiscal year, but we're rebudgeting to next year because of the COVID pandemic and them not being in yet. So with that, we have probably just over $1 million left when we include the furniture, the construction, and the project management on Station 41. And then there's obviously some other funds in there for the apparatus and the facilities. The thing to note is we do have an apparatus replacement fund in an internal service fund. We are not planning on tapping into that for next year. We're planning on using simply operating revenue. And if you look at this handout, just realize there's the budget with all the different categories in it. And then we have the LAIF accounts, which have over $10 million in reserves that are lined up with the internal services funds of what they're designated for. If all goes to plan according to this preliminary budget, we anticipate about $9 million in the Station 44 replacement fund for the internal services fund moving into this fiscal year. And a report.
Thank you, Chief. Before we ask for questions and so forth, I'd like to open a public hearing on the preliminary budget for anybody who likes to comment. Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing and open it up for questions. And let me preface it by saying the Finance Committee met with the Chief earlier today and went through the budget line by line, but I don't think it's necessary to go through that again at this point in time. And the Finance Committee did approve the preliminary budget. With that, questions and discussion on the budget, proposed preliminary budget.
I'll start by just voicing appreciation, Chief Cox, for that summary. As a board member, I look at how a community member of the public would decipher this information, and I think that's very clear. It goes over the direct numbers, and with that, I'll ask President Burke to give his impression also. In speaking for us as the board, your view of our condition financially. And again, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but just a summary of your view.
Thank you, Steve. And by the way, your comments about the explanation and the presentation of the material is very appropriate. It's very clear, and somebody who has questions can pick it up and very easily find out what's the meaning of that particular category. But let me just make a couple of general comments from my point of view. First of all, it is a conservative budget. This is not any, which our budgets have been consistently in the last number of years, and this continues that practice. Secondly, it's a little bit confusing because the district is using a new program to present this budget. And without going into details, some of you may remember we used to have internal service funds listed separately for capital equipment. And in this budget, capital equipment is included, including a new fire engine that Chief Cox mentioned and a few other things. But it's a very clean program, and there's certainly nothing different. It's just a little bit different format. In a Finance Committee meeting, I expressed a concern that I'll repeat at this point. It has to do with ERAF funds. And that is that the ERAF funds, the reimbursement that we get from the county, from the whatever ERAF stands for, I forget now, but we get, it's for education that the state takes it, and we get reimbursed. And last year, our reimbursement, I think, was about 1.2 million. It amounted to about 10% of our budget for this year. With the state's problems financially and all the things that are going on in Sacramento, they're now on their fourth redo of the budget, and there's lobbying and all kinds of activities trying to take money from Peter to pay Paul. And I expressed to Chief Cock and to Ginny that I have a little bit of concern that at some point in time, the ERAF amount might be taken or subtracted substantially from us, the revenue from that. And if this is the preliminary budget, but if that were to happen, when we approve the final budget in September, when it's on our agenda, we might have to make some adjustments to this budget. But I just mentioned that to make you aware of my concerns and whether it happens. I hope it doesn't happen, but that would be my only concern. And I guess the other long shot, and I'll shut up, I won't go through the individuals, is that, again, if you've been reading the newspapers, CalPERS, because of, among other reasons, because of the pandemic, has had a real loss and have been doing some very interesting gyrations with their finances. And at least in the press, and some people have criticized them as taking too much risk. And it's not apparent in our budget, but again, we're paying CalPERS $1.2 million a year, and having CalPERS health stay healthy is really a real issue, or could be a real issue to us in the future. But as far as the individual line items that are in the budget, we went through them, and I have no questions. There's nothing that was out of line. I thought it was very conservative. Other comments?
Bruce.
I'll back you up on that, sir. I
Okay.
really felt comfortable with the budget as well.
Bruce, did you have a question?
Yeah, for the record, ERAF is when the state steals our tax money. So that's why we had to go after Measure H in Point Montero to get more tax revenue, because the state just comes in and takes it from us.
Yeah,
There's no rhyme or reason. They just have that power. Then we're grateful when they give it back. So
that's about right. That's true.
yeah, so yeah, like you
Yeah,
said, we're going to take it in the shorts on this one.
They'll give it back to the schools.
They
Yeah,
take
look.
it for the schools.
Right. They take it for, but you're
They
right.
steal it from us.
You're
Hey,
right.
listen,
You're absolutely right.
if you review the history of ERAF and why it was enacted and so forth, it would fill up a civics class for a couple of years. All right. Any other questions? Then do I have a motion then to approve the Coastside Fire Protection District preliminary budget for the fiscal year 2020-21?
So moved.
Second,
Any further comments? Anything else, Chief Cox, you'd like to add?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you, Director.
All right, roll call, please, Jane.
President Burke,
Yes.
Vice President Cockrell,
Yes.
Secretary McShane,
yes.
Director McKimmy,
Yes.
Director Stockman.
Yes.
Passes 5-0 by roll call. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to board and directors and chief reports, as I mentioned, Finance Committee met today. In addition to the preliminary budget, we went over the spreadsheet that is in our packet and available to us. Again, we're through the May of the fiscal year. There's nothing surprising this. I just point out a couple of things that you and the public might look at. The CAL FIRE is at 82% of their budget for the year, so they'll come under budget again. The director's pay is 83% of budget for the year. Total expenses are 79% of budget, and the PARS had a very positive boost the last month of 135,000 in May, and now is up to $3.8 million. It's fine. And the salaries and benefit for this year 2020 is probably going to come in at some 67% of revenue, very healthy. So a good financial report. Anything, Jenny, you wanted to add?
No, you covered it extremely well. Thank you.
Okay, volunteer committee. JB?
Yeah, we had the volunteer meeting. It was actually quite well attended for another.
Hey,
Zoom.
JB, speak up closer or get close
Sure,
there.
I can do that. I can move closer.
Okay.
Happy to do it. we had a, actually, it's an excellent attendance considering it's one of these electronic meetings, a virtual meeting. And we discussed the usual things having to do with training they're doing. But the one thing that I got out of it that really I was happy to see is 2 of our volunteers have gone to work for Cal Fire. And they'll be there. Miguel Vasquez and Heather Kirkendall are both with Cal Fire now. They're working as firefighters one, and Chief Cox.
Yep.
But if you'd like to expand on that, that was just basically what I had to say. And as I recall, one of them will be in the unit, Santa Cruz, and the other one will be, did I understand, Fort Bragg or someplace up around there, Mendocino or something like that?
Yep.
Did I understand that correctly?
Yep.
So I was very pleased to see that. And then, as always, we discussed the election of officers, by the way, for the Half Moon Bay Volunteers. And they basically kept the officers they have. And they, on the board now, they have Fairbrother is on the board. So these, Roger Pimentel will continue to be the chief. And then you have Greg Hospital, him and George, Chad Fairbrother, and Tyler, and I forgot Tyler's last name. So that's the board. And so far as their finances concerned, they have a checking account and a savings account. And the whole total is they have $221,661 in their account. Now that's for their 501c3, which is the Half Moon Bay Volunteers, which are separate from the Coastside Volunteers. Coastside Volunteers being the operational phase, and then the Half Moon Bay Volunteer Fire Department being the honorary part of the 501c3 portion, of which they take this money and they use it for things like scholarships and stuff like that, which is very beneficial. So that's the sum total of my report. I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions of JB? Okay, then moving on to the Land and Structures Committee report, and I'd like to ask if you wouldn't mind, Steve and JB, you also report on as members of the ad hoc committee that was looking at what we might do with the existing Station 44. So JB or Steve?
I'll start. We had a walkthrough with Chief Cox, 44, a couple weeks ago. It was very beneficial to walk through with the crew and to look at the whole site. I think the big 3 things we identified about using or the possibility of replacing that station on the existing site was the identified problem of that minute-and-a-half response time to get through the neighborhoods out to the highway, and the danger of moving onto the highway leaving northbound. The other complexity was the communication equipment that's located at that station and how that would be affected if we used a different site. And then the third that I remember was moving to a different site. I mean, building on the same site has complications of station of where our personnel and apparatus go during that construction. And I would go to Chief Cox where those seem to be the main issues with that site.
JB?
My comments would pretty much mirror Steve's, and Chief Cox was there. I guess we're going to get into this in greater detail in our closed session after this part. So I'll save most of my remarks for that part of the meeting.
Chief Cox, was there anything you wish to add about the Station 44?
No, I think it was a great
Currently?
meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no other comments. I think it was a good meeting, a good walkthrough, and gave us a good sense of kind of the current dynamics of that location and what we're looking to solve for as far as what the priorities are moving forward.
Okay. Any questions? All right, moving on then, Special District Association, Director McKimmey,
No meeting, no report.
ALS JPA, Director McKimmey,
Same deal, no meeting, no report.
Emergency Preparedness, Director Stockman.
There was a May meeting of KEEP that obviously was a Zoom meeting also. I think the one main point that came out of that affects the community is there was the main speaker was the city manager, Bob Nesbitt, and he shared that they were no longer going to have the contract for a Coastside coordinator, emergency coordinator. So they were gonna, that was a shared contract with the county. County OES will still provide service to the Coastside, but that representation of a specific person to meet the Coastside's needs will no longer be in next year's budget. So I think the communities, and especially the city, I think the city's in a good position with their staffing to provide the services that the county did. I think my concern is the rest of the unincorporated Coastside, of what role county OES will take now that position change. I think that'll be an ongoing conversation, and the communities, as well as the fire districts, ability to define what our needs are and what our expectations are from county OES. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, moving on, attorney's report.
Nothing, thank you.
Fire chief's report, Chief Cox or Chief Larkin, if he's on.
Yeah, just a few things. I guess first of all, we should start just talking about Fire Captain Lutz and the big hit that we've taken this week in losing him. As you're aware, Captain Lutz died in an off-duty accident last week. He was a captain on the coast for the last over 4 years. Served in the training bureau, and then most recently at Station 41. Plans are being developed right now. Chief Larkin and the union are pretty deep into getting that established and working with the family. And thank you to everybody who reached out and has sent messages and stopped by. It really helps, and we really appreciate that. So a sad time for us, and he will be greatly missed, and he leaves a big void on the coast and within our organization. With that, we are still in the pandemic and dealing with the COVID-19 shelter-in-place requirements here. Our crews have seen an increase in calls from the bottoming out that they saw in late March, early April. And that tends to be with the fact that we're getting a lot more visitors back to the coast. If you've noticed, traffic on the weekends and the evenings is getting back to that pre-COVID levels. We had one major emergency down on Highway 1 last week. We had a head-on collision that required fairly extensive extrication, as well as the new heavy rescue being taken down there. With that, the prevention office is still working with the contractor on the weed abatement. We're also happy to announce that we've transferred a fire captain who's been in the Fire Prevention Bureau for, at least the last 5 or 6 years from the San Mateo County side, who wanted to come and work on the coast, and we have been able to fill that position with Fire Captain Griffin. So we have someone behind Fire Captain Hibden, who promoted to battalion chief. The good news there, he's got a wealth of knowledge and experience, and he's not coming in blindly to it. With that, we also just have a meeting on Station 41 with Jeff Katz next week, and that's just a punch list walk for going through the new facility and looking for items that need to be addressed. We're also going to be going out and getting the permits necessary for the tree work to be done at the old Station 44 for the trees that are presenting a hazard either to the road or to the station. Staff is currently working on outfitting one of the staff vehicles that arrived. It should be in service here relatively soon. We are scheduling the SSA interviews for that second SSA here in the admin office. And we're still in the process really with the operations chief. We're just in the process still is the best way to put it. And right now, as far as the movement of people between programs, there's been no impact to the Coastside budget with any movement of personnel. And that's the end of my report.
Any questions, Chief Cox? Then I would like to, this is going to close, the board is going to close the session, and we'll move to closed session on a conference with real property negotiators regarding government code section 54956.8. But before we go into closed session, I'd like to, on behalf of the board and all of us, adjourn this meeting with a moment of prayer and silence in memory of CAL FIRE Captain David Lutz. Thank you. We now are in closed session.